right, Junkie Nation, he is back. The legend himself, Randy Couture. He will be cage side calling the fights at PFL 2021 number 7. It takes place Friday, August 13th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on ESPN2. What's going on, Randy? How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Doing great. Hey, I was just watching the Olympics. I don't know if you caught any of it, but Greco-Roman's going on right now. And, man, it was really, really exciting to see these wrestlers, chasing their dream, coming down to their knees and crying, and that was a couple bronze medal matches. You made the Olympic team, 3 teams as an alternate. You represented our country when, you wrestled internationally. What's that scene like compared to prize fighting?
It's I know it's hard to explain. Every time I watch the Olympics and I see one of our athletes on that podium and hear our national anthem, it makes me well up. It's one of those goals that you literally chased for 4 years to try and get a shot at making the team. And then obviously if you're fortunate enough to come out on top and be the number 1 guy, that's a lot of work and a lot of time and effort and energy. I was in that situation several times and came up short, which was devastating to me. And so I can't imagine accomplishing that, getting there, and then having a successful competition and getting on the podium to see your flag raised and represent your country and your sport. I'm not sure it gets any better than that, honestly.
You once told us that maybe that's what drove you to be a world champion, because you hadn't reached the conclusion of the goal that you wanted in wrestling, but yet in MMA you did many times. So what if you had? What do you think? Do you think your whole life goes in a different direction? Like maybe you go for another Olympics, or you maybe take over a wrestling program? Like, would you have felt this personal athletic satisfaction, or do you think something still maybe rub up on MMA?
I believe if I'd have made the 92 or the 96 teams, those were the two Olympic years that I was the number 1 guy in my weight class, and probably the guy that they expected to make those teams or win a medal. And I believe if I'd have been successful there, I would be a college coach right now somewhere. I would have stayed in coaching. I would have never forayed. I would have been satisfied and rested on those laurels, on that accomplishment. I chased that for over 16 years to try and make that team and win that medal. And it never happened. And so I think I still had a fire in my belly and still wanted to compete. And things worked out the way they were supposed to work out, because I ended up in a cage, on canvas instead of on a mat. And, that's just the way it is. It's the way it unfolded. And, looking back, I can't have any regrets.
And not too familiar with what weight class you were at the time, but would you have met up with the great Alexander Karelin, or was he one weight class above?
He was a heavyweight. I was in wrestling, it goes more by your weight class. We don't have names like they do in fighting. Welterweights, featherweights, light heavyweights. I wrestled 198 and 213. After 96, they changed the weight classes a little bit to make more room for women's weight classes and women's freestyle wrestling. Karelin was a heavyweight. So obviously Matt Gaffari wrestled him in the Olympic finals and the World Championship finals. Rulon Gardner is the one that defeated him when he was going for his 4th gold medal in Sydney. Pretty remarkable match. And obviously we just saw the Cuban in Greco win his 4th gold medal, which is the first time that's ever happened in history. Karelin would have been the first had Rulon not beat him, but the Cuban just did that. He won his 4th Olympic gold medal in Greco-Roman wrestling at heavyweight. So pretty remarkable Olympics going on. Wrestling just started a couple days ago. Our women's team is dominating and doing very, very well. The Greco guys are struggling a little bit, and that's been a tradition. It's not a terribly popular style in our country. So our younger kids spend a lot of time on the mat in college style, trying to be a collegiate champion, and more similarly freestyle. And not a lot of guys venture into Greco. And consequently, I think we're under the gun experience-wise when we step onto that international stage at the World Championships or the Olympic Championships.
And if they only knew how much those Greco skills do transfer over to MMA. And by the way, I did watch Baumgartner win that live. I happened to be changing the channels and I caught it. I couldn't believe it when it went down like that because I remember how dominant
Rulon Gardner. Baumgartner.
Yeah, Rulon Gardner. You're right. I was thinking of Bruce Baumgartner from the 80s. That guy, Mijaín Lopez is his name. Yeah, that's amazing. And he weighs 290. I mean,
guy athletic as heck. I mean, he's an athlete.
4 gold medals, 9 world championship medals, and I think 5 of those are gold. That's amazing, man. But he's 38 because the first thing I thought was some of these Cuban fighters are coming over to MMA, but 38, I don't know about that one.
Well, come on. He's got a good 10 years left.
That's true. All right. Oh, by the way, I saw Lopez in Vegas, but he didn't win a gold that time. He lost to a guy from Turkey. But I've seen that guy here in Vegas at the World
Championship here. I watched that too. I was here. Actually got to commentate a little bit for the Greco competition, which was really fun for the broadcast.
Yeah, this is some folks. You got to watch the Olympics. The wrestling has kicked off, and it's really, really fun. I saw a German just win the bronze medal in Greco. He had 3 gold medals. Kobler was his name. And then he left his shoes. He actually retired. And that kind of moved me because I saw just the way, what he brought his career to a close in wrestling. And that was pretty moving for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that we do. It's something indigenous to wrestling. When you're done, you're going to hang it up. You put take your shoes off and leave them in the center of the mat. Cover them with your handkerchief. It's an international federation rule that you have to have a handkerchief in your shorts when you compete, so that if you bleed, you can wipe that up. So that's a very common ritual when guys retire from the sport.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool to watch. All right, so let's talk about wrestling. I'm going to start with a direct question. Look, they're going with welterweights and lightweights in these semifinals now at PFL on the road to the $1 million fights in October here in Vegas. What is your favorite division to commentate? Yeah, not your favorite division like when you were, obviously I'm sure you're partial light heavyweight and heavyweights, but what about the commentate? What's your favorite?
Well, I think we've seen, you look at the welterweights and the light heavyweights, and we've seen a 70+% finish rate with those 2 weight classes and those fights historically in the PFL. And that's always exciting. Something explosive is about to happen. And you look at this, Ray Cooper, Rory McDonald matchup. I mean, that is an amazing matchup. That's going to be probably the fight of the night. You've got the raw ferociousness of Ray Cooper III and the technical surgical expertise of Rory McDonald. I mean, that's going to be a very interesting fight. But the welterweights and the light heavyweights traditionally have been very explosive and very fun to commentate and to watch.
We talked to both guys, both Cooper and McDonald, and McDonald was like, hey, this is just another fight. I've been in some big fights. Cooper, same thing. He's always so chill, but he did seem to have a chip on his shoulder. Like, this guy's coming over, like to my territory. And it's been a fun way to build up a fight without getting into like heavy trash talk. Did you ever experience that as a fighter where either somebody was being talked about to be brought over or was brought over and you felt like, okay, we got to show this guy what it's like here, wherever you were fighting at the time?
Well, obviously I was instigating, trying to get Fedor Emelianenko to come over to the UFC and make that fight happen. At that particular time, they had us in the rankings as the number 1 and number 2 heavyweights in the world. And that was, they had him at number 1. If that's where you want to be, then that's the guy you need to fight. And obviously that fight never materialized. They had a lot of trouble dealing with M1 Global, who wanted a co-promotion, and the UFC was not willing to do that. So that fight never happened. But that was the one, the one that I saw how they had him ranked. And I mean, that was the fight I wanted for sure.
The lightweight division is missing their champion. Cooper's in the welterweights, but the lightweights, although Schulte's on the card, he won't be fighting. So this is a time to crown a new champion. You think that's better for the PFL, or would it have been good for somebody to be shooting for 3 straight? What do you think builds this young person? What script's better?
I think it certainly would have been. There were a lot of naysayers with Nathan Schultz coming out of the first season, especially. and then he shut them all up and did it again in the second season. So I don't know if it made that big a difference for the PFL, honestly, but I think Nathan held up. He backed up what he did in the first season, and it's a tribute to the PFL and the level of competition that they brought in all the weight classes. I mean, you got a 2-time champ like Lance Palmer and a 2-time champ like Nathan Schultz, both going down. It tells you where the organization's at. They're not protecting anybody. You better bring your A game, whether you won the championship last year or not. So I certainly think that's probably good for the PFL and the image of the PFL, and an indicator of just how tough the field is in every single weight class.
That is exactly what I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad you brought it up. When we talk to fighters, sometimes they'll bring up whether they feel they're in their prime yet, if they've hit it yet. And when you look at the PFL, look at the undercard, right? The prelims, the fighters that are on that card. It's a pretty solid card right there, just alone on the undercard. Where do you think the PFL's at? Do you think they've had enough time where you could say now they're hitting their prime, their stride, or do they still have some tricks up their sleeve?
I think this organization is just starting to get the traction. People are starting to become aware of the format, of the difference, what makes us a little bit different than all the other promotions in mixed martial arts out there. And I think that is directly related to those athletes that are putting their butts on the line, embracing the grind, turning around every 6 weeks in the regular season, now hoping to get a shot at this year's title. So I think we're just now starting to tap into the potential of what the PFL is and this format and what it means to the sport of mixed martial arts. The athletes getting treated better, getting paid better. Let's be honest. There's a large percentage of this roster of fighters in every weight class that would have been fortunate to climb up into that upper echelon of 3 or 4% of the guys that are making 6-figure contracts and 6-figure money. And these guys they all have a shot. Everybody's equal. It doesn't matter what publicity stunt you pull, how much smack you talk. You've got to go out and score points and win. And we're seeing, look at Clay Collard. Here's a guy that a lot of the other promotions in the sport would have wrote off and said, nah, he just, he's long in the tooth. He's a one-trick pony. And he's got a genuine shot at winning it this season and being the number one guy in that weight class. So I think it's a tribute to both the athletes and this organization.
Man, did I send you my notes or something? Clay was actually the next guy I wanted to talk about. Clay stands out for me because now I know that you've seen a couple of these fighters a few times. You're very familiar with them. But Clay has this style where he'll sit down and he'll tell you exactly what he's going to do. And he's got a smile on his face about it, no doubt whatsoever. And then he does it. How much, when you talk to these guys mentally, how much can you pick up on which guys are really fine-tuned for their fight? Because Clay seems like one of those guys that he seems like he's the guy right now.
Yeah, I agree. And talking to him, you get that sense. He's very comfortable with who he is, with what his style is. He knows exactly where he wants to be. And he explains that. He articulates that very, very well. We've seen, some other athletes in the PFL that the same thing. They break it down exactly how I would break it down in my head if I was facing that problem and had to solve that problem. And that's always fun to me. It's always funny to me, and I appreciate that for sure. Talking to Taylor Gordado, and she breaks down tactically and technically how she thinks she needs to win a fight, and almost verbatim, it's how I would have described it as well. I've just lost her name, but the gal that fought Clarissa Shields the first time and came so close to giving her her first loss. She described how to approach that exactly how I would have coached her or sought out to solve that problem myself. And I was like, man, that's exactly how I would do that. So I always like that. It's always, I find that very interesting.
Since you already have the blueprint on George and I, and you know what we're going to ask you, I got to throw you a curveball now. You brought up publicity stunts, right? And I started thinking about all these fighters that are fighting celebrities and boxers versus MMA. But if we went back in the day, and they were doing this back when you were fighting. Is there a certain celebrity that you just didn't like that you would have wanted to fight? You know, Pee Wee Herman, or man, that John Stamos, I can't stand him. Is there one guy that stands out where you just go, you know what, I would have loved to tangle with that guy?
Well, I think this has already been discussed. After I retired, I don't know what UFC it was, but it was at MGM. And I walked in through the back, as a lot of us get access back there to get to our seats without having to go through the crowd. And I run smack into Jay Glazer and about 3 other journalists. And Jay jokingly said, "Hey, we were just talking about you. Who would you come out of retirement to fight?" And I said, "Well, if Steven Seagal would sign the contract, I would come out to fight him." And obviously I was joking, Jay was joking, but the other 3 journalists that were standing there took that seriously. And they went to Seagal. Couture says he'd come out of retirement if you'd fight him. And if he of course had a very entertaining response to that. So I would have to stick with that. That would be the guy. I mean, everybody knows the rumors and all the stuff regarding, stuntmen getting injured, doing scenes and stuff with him, which is, does happen on occasion, but is not the norm. But it seemed like he went out of his way to make it a point of, putting a little extra on those situations where he could hurt somebody to kind of make himself look better and prove that he was legitimate. And that's where I got started. I got started in stunts and was lucky enough to get some real acting gigs. So for all the stuntmen out there, I would stick to my guns there and say Seagal would be that guy.
Shout out to Frank Trigg and Jay Haran. All right, last question for me. I'm going to miss 2 fights in one night. And from the people I've talked to in the PFL, they've said, we're going to see how this goes. We definitely have thought about bringing it back, or maybe we won't. We're not sure. But let's say they're at a round table and the vote is 5-5, and they go, wow, it looks like it's up to Randy as far as next season bringing back 2 fights in one night, meaning, the quarterfinal stage. What would you vote for?
I would vote for the 2 fights in one night. Actually, I liked having the quarterfinal, semifinal. I think it's something that people were attracted to. That's a special adversity that the fighters are dealing with, to have to load up and figure out how to solve a problem again that same night. Obviously, there's physical challenges. They're still only fighting 5 rounds, which is equivalent to a championship fight. I thought it added a whole nother layer to the onion for the athletes. That made it intriguing, made it interesting. The storylines changed. Do you think somebody is going to win something and then they have a rough first fight, and another guy has a quick knockout or a quick tap out, and now those guys have to move forward. I just thought it added, again, differentiated the PFL from some of the other organizations that are out there in the sport of mixed martial arts right now.
I agree. There's something carnal about that night. I'll never forget Sean O'Malley in Long Beach. I mean, gutting it through and putting himself in a position to win the $1 million. Then he did win the $1 million. And remember, Vinny took it to him early. So Sean had one of the roughest years ever, and now his life has changed. And then just the historical side of seeing the early UFCs and seeing some of these fighters, it's what made them legends, is not just winning it, but that road to get there. And lastly, I've even been in these training rooms where they're training for these events and the coaches are making them go through rounds and then rest about an hour or 2, and then they're coming back like they're mimicking it, So the preparation's interesting, the night of the fights is interesting, and then, of course, the legacy it leaves is historical. So I'm glad you voted that way.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything you just described. The training, how to manage that whole thing and solve the problems twice in one night is remarkable.
All right, I know we're keeping you from watching the Olympics. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We look forward to your call of the fights at PFL Week 7, 2021.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure to see you. You guys take care.